It's a great honor and a privilege to introduce Aaron Farkas. We're here in your beautiful apartment in Jerusalem.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview.
You're very welcome.
So if you could tell us a little bit about your family and your roots and...
Sure, absolutely. So to begin with, I want to show you two books. Let's start with this one. This one is a sefer, actually an autobiography that my Aunt Esther Klein wrote a number of years ago. She was the Rebbitzin of Yesodot. Her late husband was the Rav of Yesodot, Ben Zion Klein. And it's a marvelous, well-written autobiography, and she tells the story of what she went through as a child and coming and winding up in Auschwitz with her father. And I just want to point out something here that is amazing. So this is a picture of her father. This is actually my stepfather. I'll come back to my step-grandfather. I'll come back to my grandfather in a minute. And this is Esther when she was a child. And what's amazing is you see there's a hand on Esther's shoulder. Okay, that hand is my grandmother. There is no photo of I have no photo of my grandmother. Okay, of my mother's mother. That's the only of that. His name was Shmuel Aaron Deitch. That was his name, and his one of his children was very well known as the Helmetzer Rav, the Helmetzer Rebbe. He wrote a 12, I think it was either 10 or 12 volume set called Taharas Yom Tov, and he was very well known as helping to set up mikvahs all around the world. And he lived in Cleveland after the war. The title of the book is what is it called? Tzvasa Kiyamti Abba, because when they first got to Auschwitz, her father realized what was going on here, and this is going to be the end. And he said to his daughter, 12-year-old Esther, remember where you come from, Esther. Remember your home, what kind of home you come from, and to keep that kind of home when you leave here. No, he said you were going to leave here, and to keep the home that we kept. I mean, a kosher home. It's amazing. And she said, and basically she did that. You know, she said, I kept my promise.
Where did they come from? Which country? So
my grandfather, my step-grandfather, Shmuel Aaron Deitch, he was, I think he grew up in either in Hungary or Czechoslovakia, I think Hungary, and he was a chassid of the Satmar Rebbe, the old Satmar Rebbe. And in fact, one of his children was named after one of the Rebbes, Hananya Yom Tov Lipa, which was one of the Rebbe's names. And he was actually also known as the Shoichet for another well-known tzaddik, Reb Shaila Karastir. And then once Reb Shaila died, he went on to a larger city, Mishkos, where he continued, being a Shoichet.
And Aaron, was in that picture.
Yeah.
Where was the wife, or were there any other children?
Yes, they had, I believe there were about 11 children, about that, and his wife, my grandmother, this was his second marriage, and for my grandmother was also a second marriage. So he came into the marriage, she came into the marriage, I should say, believe it or not, with two children of her own from losing her first husband, which I'll mention in a minute, my grandfather, and he came into the marriage, or she came into the marriage. He had 10 children, so it was like 12 kids that they were dealing with, and so The only children, there were only 3 children that survived the war, the camps. So it was my mother, my aunt, who wound up marrying someone that I'll get to in a minute, and Esther, who wrote this book. Okay, so what do you call it? So my grandmother, her name was Zisi, and I'm told by my mother she was a very beautiful woman. And after her first husband died, her first husband's name was Aaron Zelig, so I'm named after him, Aaron Zelig. Yeah. So he died in the infamous 1918 flu epidemic. So he was a young man, but in those days, that kind of a flu affected the younger people. And so my mother was actually born after her biological father died. So she didn't have a father when she was born, and she had a brother. I don't remember if he was older or younger, about the same age. His name is Yitzchak. And Yitzchak was recruited into the war. I think he was in the Hungarian army. And like many other Jews, when there was a field of mines, who would they send out first? The Jews. So he perished in that kind of situation. My mother has always had a picture of him in her bedroom, along with other family members. He was a handsome young man. I believe he had a family, and they perished also. So that was E.C. Deitch. Now I'm going to jump to this sefer here, which is Sefer Yuchsin, which is genealogy of the family, and this was written by my uncle Reb Sender Deitch, who was well known in the Satmar community as the president of the Satmar community when Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum was the Rav, was the Satmar Rav, and Reb Sender was his right-hand man. And he's also known as being the publisher of a well-known Yiddish paper in those days. It was called the Yid, and that was him. And so he was considered in those days the statesman, one of the statesmen of Satmar. He knew how to handle, how to talk to people, and so on and so forth. So I didn't know much about my grandmother's Yichus genealogy. I don't know why, I just didn't. And I only came across the sefer a couple of years ago, actually just before we came to Israel, which was a little less than 2 years ago. And one of my extended relatives pointed to me. She says to me, "I want to show you the section in the sefer where your family is mentioned." I said, "Oh wow, okay. Let me see." So I start to read it. So Reb Sender Deitch's mother-in-law was E.C. Deitch, because he married. My mother's name was Zelda, and so her sister. She had 2 sisters. One was Esther, who wrote this book, and one was Rochel Malka, who married Reb Sender Deitch. Okay, so he talks about his mother-in-law, Zisel Deitch. And he says that, I'll just read a little bit. Chamosi Mor Zisel Noldo Levia, so on and so Reb Yaakov HaKohen Shvartz. So my great-grandfather was a Kohen from Nanash. So Nanash was a city in Hungary, and it was called, the full name was Hoidu Nanash, and that was in northeast Hungary, and they also called it Nanash. And he says, Megeza Rabosenu Hashach. She comes from the Shach. Megala Mukalt, also from the Megala, who was a great Mukobal. The Ramah, okay, Ulamala Bakodesh, and others also. So it was like, wow. I didn't know she was such a yichus. And he goes on and on about her. One of the things I also learned from one of my cousins was that Rochel Malka, my aunt, who was nifter a number of years ago, so I was wondering, where did she get the name Rochel Malka from? So my cousin told me that, and her mother was Rochel Malka actually, and I asked her, like, how did she get? So it turns out that Shmuel Aaron, okay, so his wife died, he became a widow, and then he married my grandmother. So his wife's name, his late wife was Rochel Malka, and she and my grandmother told him that why don't you name, because they had they had a few more kids, with my grandmother. I said, why don't you name one of your kids after you'll remember your wife that way. And she said, wow, it's like amazing that somebody would want to do that to that. So that was pretty amazing. Let's see, what else can I say? Let's see, as far as my mom, she wound up, let me back up a little bit. So as far as so there were only 3 kids that survived the war, and I imagine the others didn't survive because if you were under either 16 or 15, then that was it. You didn't survive, and and the others were older, so they survived. Let me see here. So let me jump a little forward now. After the war, they wound up in DP camp, displaced persons camp in Feldafing, in Germany. Some people pronounce it Feldafing. And so Feldafing was one of the first camps that the United States set up in Germany. There were other camps from other countries. I think Italy had a zone of DP, and France had one. And the Americans had one, and Baruch Hashem, we were in the American zone, which I was told was one of the better ones. And so, so yes, we were there, and I don't have any bad memories. I hardly have any memories of the place because we left when I was about 5. But there's pictures of myself and my friends that were there, and we looked like happy kids.
So what year were you born?
I was born in July 12, 1948. So a few months after the independence of Israel, I came along.
Were you born in?
No, so on my passport they had me listed as being born in Germany, which meant that I was born technically in the DP camp, displaced persons camps. But in reality, I was born in Hungary. But what happened was the Iron Curtain had come up, and I guess my parents knew what, if you stayed in Hungary, what was going to be under communist rule. So we left illegally across the border during the night, 3 weeks old. And my mother said that in her haste as they were running, she dropped me, a 3-week-old baby. And normally, you drop a baby, the baby starts to cry. And she said, you saved our life because you didn't cry. So I was probably in shock, not knowing what happened here. So Baruch Hashem, go ahead.
How did that picture survive?
That's a very good question. That is a very good question. It must have, I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. I can ask my cousin, who's the Rav now of Yesodot, and I can find out.
So it's quite amazing that such a picture.
Yeah.
You have it.
Yeah.
And where did your mother meet your father?
My mother. So let me think here a second. So I'm not sure if my father came from a Hasidic family or not. I'm under the impression that he did, because I'm told that the sandik at my father's bris was the Spinker Rebbe. So that makes sense, and that makes sense that they would be Hasidic related. So, but my mother was not interested in even though she grew up in this Hasidic household, she was not really interested in continuing as in a Hasidic kind of way. She was more modern. And my father was also a more modern type, didn't have a beard, not Hasidic himself. And he was on the run from wherever his family was from, because I was told that, there was a certain list of people who came from good families, and that's where the Nazis were going to go after them first. So he was already on the run.
In which country was your father?
He was from Czechoslovakia, from a town called Shalank, which I have not been able to identify yet. I'm sure I'll find it soon, and which is supposedly near Salish. So I'll look into that one, because I just found out about that. And so he wound up in Miskolc in Hungary, and I'm not sure how he wound up at my grandparents' home, but he did. And not long after they met him, they said, my father's name was Shulam Farkas. And they said, she's from a Hasidic home, he's from a Hasidic home. They're both not interested in really being Hasidic. Let's hook them up. So actually, the Helmutzer Rebbe's brother, his name was Itzik Hersh, who was a Rav in Detroit. But before in Europe, he made the shidduch, and they made it happen. So they were married sometime during the war. And what happened was that somehow they got separated during the war. And so Baruch Hashem, I wasn't born during the war for obvious reasons. And my dad wound up in Bessarabia in a prisoner of war camp. Okay, and Bessarabia, I only found that recently, was also the city or the area where the infamous Kishinev massacres took place. That was Bessarabia. So he was in a prisoner of war camp. She had already been, liberated, and she found out. And what I'm going to tell you now is one of these Ripley's Believe It or Not stories, where they say the truth is stranger than fiction. Okay, so somewhere along the line, my mother hears from someone that my father is alive, because they were separated for a number of years, and that he's in this area called Bessarabia. And now how do you make a connection, because he's in a prisoner of war camp? So my mother winds up meeting a major, a Russian, Soviet Union major. I don't know if he was Jewish or not. I didn't ask. And she told him her story, what's going on. And he said, I'm missing my wife. I've been missing my wife also. And the way my mother explained it was that he had Rahmanas on her. And he said, either he said, I'm going to be in that area anyway, or I can, I'll see what I can do to get there. And give me a picture of yourself, write a letter, and so on. I'll do whatever I can to make sure he gets this letter. Somehow or other, the letter is delivered to him. Okay, and now he sees, wow, fantastic. My wife is my loved one is still here, and so now the question is, how does he get out? Okay, so my dad spoke a lot of languages. Okay, 7-8 languages. And he was one of the people, I'm told, who would correspond to the outside world when you needed to, send something. So he sends a letter to a man that my mother said, I'll tell you the name in a minute. And I said, Ma, it can't be there, because my mother used to always mix up names. Like if my friends would call and they said, who called? There's no such person by that name, Ma. So when she told me this guy's name, I said, nah, it can't be that name. So anyway, one day I was working in sales, so one day I'm with a customer, and we finished doing our business, and he says, by the way, you should read this particular book. I said, well, what's it called? It's called The Wolf of the Kremlin. That doesn't sound like somebody nice. I said, well, what's it about? It's about this guy, Lazar Kaganovich. And Lazar Kaganovich was the man that my mother mentioned. Oh, there is such a person, Lazar. And who is Lazar Kaganovich? So he was the right hand, one of the right hand men to Stalin, Joseph Stalin. Okay, he was obviously an atheist because he was a Jew and a communist, a high-ranking communist, and he was also Minister of Transportation. Okay. So he sends a letter to Kaganovich. I don't know how this letter reached him, okay, because it's like sending a letter to the president or someone like that, chief of staff, and he gets the letter, and my dad basically says that there's 120 Jews here, and do what you can to get us out. And I'm sure there was more to it than that, okay? So I'm thinking to myself, you know, they say that in the worst Jew, they say there's this Pintel Yid, okay? So even though he was considered one of the main guys who executed Stalin's orders and must have killed a lot of people that way, he wound up sending a train to wherever it was that they were. And if Kaganovich gives an order only to let out the Jews, you don't ask questions. So my dad and the other 120 Jews were saved because of my mother and my father. So they were both heroes in getting these people out, you know. So a bunch of kids in mid-20s, you know, saved all these Jews. Amazing. So I tell people sometimes that in addition to the Rabbeinu Shalom, you know, bringing me here, that and my parents, Kaganovich, Lazar Kaganovich, this Russia also had a hand in my being here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So that was quite amazing. Let me just see what else there was, unless you have a question here. Let me see what else I can tell you. Okay.
Did your parents used to speak to you a lot about?
She spoke to me about the Lager, which I think the Lager was the work camp, because she was in Auschwitz for a while, but then she went into I guess a work camp, and which I think is called a Lager, if I'm not mistaken. And she talked about it, but I don't remember anything specific that. I think she would get, because she was very attractive and she was able to finagle things and get things, and then she would share it with her siblings or other people.
Did your mom have a number on her own?
No, I don't think she did. It's a good question. I don't remember. I'll have to ask my sister, but I don't remember. Actually, what I do remember, not war related, was she was one eye was crossed. I don't know why that happened, and I only realized it when I was already in my 40s. Ma, your eyes, one eye is. But that's what it was, you know.
Father Stern, she stood up to that German.
Oh yeah. So I do. Yeah, she did tell me that when they were in the camp, one of the female German guards yelled out at them that in German, in Deutsch, and she said, "Wir wollen euch alle vernichten. We're going to destroy you all." And my mother shouts back and she goes, "Nein, wir wollen euch alle vernichten." So how she survived that, I don't know. I think that the guard was so in shock that somebody would do that. Okay. Or they said, "Oh, it's Zelda again." You know, she's little big mouth. So yeah.
And Aaron's mother was quite diminutive. She was like 4'10", right?
Yeah, she was a little Napoleon, actually. She was a little Napoleon.
Did your mom, did she always keep her emunah, her faith?
Yes. I remember she told me that after being born without a father and after losing her mother, she said to the Rebbeinu Shalom, "I don't have a father. I don't have a mother. You're going to be my father. You have to be my mother." So that was her. That was her connection, and so definitely she would talk to Hashem every so often. Yeah, and I'll tell you just two quick stories also about my mom. I said she's like a little Napoleon. And she was short and also was very strong-minded, let's put it that way. So one time, after I had lost my father when I was about 11. He was sick for 2 years. He died very young. He was about 43. And so after that, I was sort of like not knowing, up or down, because I was sort of like going what I was going through. So we wind up at one point she schleps me to Williamsburg and to a yeshiva called the Vini Yeshiva, okay? And the Rosh Yeshiva, he was called the Hat Hazaruv, and he had this I don't know what they call this kind of accent, not German, Berliner accent, I don't recall. He was a tall man, and he gives me a bechina. He asks me certain questions, and I don't have any answers to anything that he asked me. And he said in a very stern voice, in Yiddish, and I'll translate, he says, belangt nicht doi. He doesn't belong here, just like that. And in retrospect, afterwards I thought, that's how you talk to an orphan, anyway. So somebody else would have said, okay, I'm sorry, I bothered you, let's go, let's go out. So my mother, she's not in the sprawl, she's not, it's okay. So I'm ready to tell my mother, come, let's go. He doesn't want me. She says, no, take it easy. So she walks up to him. She's like this and he's like that. And she looks up at him. She's like almost toe-to-toe with him. And she says, oh, this is how you talk to me. And he looks down at her, and like people don't usually talk to him like this. And she continues and she says, do you know who you're talking to? And he looks at her and he says, no, I don't know who I'm talking to. And who am I talking to? And she says, so she doesn't answer the question, and then she goes on and she says, wer mein Tate gewesen? Do you know who my father was? And he looks down at her and he says, nein, I don't know who your father was. Then he goes like, wer gewesen Tate? Who is your father? And she says, mein Tate gewesen Shmuel Aaron Deitch. My father was Shmuel Aaron Deitch. And then he says, wait a second, Shmuel Aaron Deitch, the Shochet von Mishkolz? And he says, yes, that's the one. And then he goes, he's immediately accepted. But in the long run, he was right, because I didn't really belong. There was more of a Hasidic yeshiva, and I wasn't really into learning at that time that much.
And how old were you at this time?
I must have been about 13 or so.
And you remember this incident?
Yeah, I do remember that. It was very vivid to me. And then there was another time, real quick, my mother was already older. I was, dating, so she wanted to go down to Florida. Took me with her, and in Florida, we were sitting at this table, and there were other people at the table. In this case, there was a rabbi, a modern Orthodox rabbi with his children, and we had a nice meal. And then the rabbi says, "Okay, we're going to bench now." And my mother says, "Wait a second." And then she looks at him in Yiddish, and she says, "Rabbi, I don't understand. When you're at a Shabbos Suda, you're supposed to sing Zemiris. And it's a wonder to me that you're a rabbi and you don't sing Zemiris."
Rather your stature.
So she was, she just said it like it is. She's a little embarrassed, I guess, but I'm sure after that he always did Zemiris at a table. So that was my mom. Now my dad, he was, when he came to America, let me back up a little bit. So back in the DP camp, one of the great Rabbanim that were there was the Klosenberger Rebbe, okay, in Feldafing. And so he was a great admirer of his because of what he accomplished there. And by the way, in Feldafing, I also learned later that the supreme commander of Allied forces in World War II was General Eisenhower. Eisenhower visited thing, along with the other famous general, General Patton, okay, to see how things were, and because this was a model camp, so he was checking to see what was going on, and I'm told that he helped build a hospital there, for people, and also additional housing. So when we came to America,
How long were you in the camp?
5 years. 5 years. And one of my best friends was a kid by the name of, we called him Shmulek, Sam, he grew up Sam Norach. And Shmulek was a brilliant kid, and he wound up, when we came to America, he wound up going to Columbia, he and Naher, and he wound up becoming first the director of YIVO in New York. I don't know if you're familiar with YIVO, yeah. And then he wound up becoming the publisher of the Forward. And so he was interested, he was very successful that way. And we would get together every so often.
And can I just ask, in the camps, did you remember going to school? Do you remember?
I have no memory of the camps for whatever reason. I don't know why. The only thing that I have hypothesis about is that when I grew up, I had a great deal of difficulty making eye contact with people. And it occurred to me, well, why am I having this problem? It was just painful for me to do that. It's a lot easier now, but I still have a residue of that if I do it too long. And what I came to conclusion was that I probably wound up seeing people, if I made contact with people, eye contact, I would see the pain that they've been through, and I would probably feel the pain, and the way to avoid feeling that pain was just to not look at people's eyes. So I think that must have had something to do with it. I don't know.
Because I think the vast majority were survivors.
They were survivors, yeah, exactly, right. And so that was that. So in America, my father, I guess my parents didn't know what yeshiva, and then he must have learned that the Klosenberg Rebbe has a yeshiva. So even though I wasn't Hasidish a kid, he said, all right, you're going to Klosenberg. So I went to Klosenberg Yeshiva. I was there for a year. I remember seeing the Klosenberg Rebbe here and there every so often in the lobby. And after a year, my parents took me out. Many years later, I asked my mom, why did Tati take me out of Klosenberg? And she says to me, well, there's a gewollt wachsen pious, because you wanted to grow pious, because you wanted to fit in like the other kids, and I was one of the few kids who didn't have pious. So once my dad heard that, oh no, he's not going to be, sorry, I'm only going so far. Yeah.
Aaron, I have to ask,
sure.
When your family's decision to go to America,
yeah.
Did somebody sponsor them? Or?
Yes. So my dad had an uncle, and we called him Vetter Itzik, Uncle Itzik. He and his wife, Mimala, we could call Aunt Rosie, and they lived in Bensonhurst, and they sponsored us coming to America. Yeah.
Was there any option of coming to Israel?
That's a good question. Technically, I guess if they had contacted my aunt in Israel, it's possible they could have sponsored them. But for whatever reason, I don't think they had an interest in. I guess from what I understand, Israel was a very tough place to live in those days early on. So, and I don't think he was particularly a Zionist. So I don't
Is that because of the background coming from Satmar?
Well, he did. Well, my mother's family came from Satmar, but it's possible that could have been a factor, but I'm not really sure. You mentioned Satmar, so one of the other memories I have of my dad was that when I was about, how old was I? About 9. I forgot how old I was already then, maybe 8, 9 years old. So we went to, it was a Shana Rabbah, and my dad took me to Satmar to see Satmar and all that. And my dad put me on his shoulders, and this was, they were making hakafas, they were making the rounds, and and I was on his shoulders, and I remember my dad crying. It was very emotional to hear the Rebbe, to hear because what I was hearing was this krechtsing, was this moaning and davening, and it was just very emotional, watching him, get so, I guess it reminded him of home and the family and so on.
And so this was Rabbi Tattlebaum.
Yeah, Rabbi Tattlebaum, exactly.
And this was in Williamsburg.
This is in Williamsburg at the Satmar Shul, yeah.
And you remember seeing the Rebbe?
Yeah, I do remember. And what I remember was amazing was that there was this, even though I couldn't put it into words, there was this dynamic going on where I see this tzaddik, and he takes a step forward, he makes a krechts, he yells out, it's like something like as if he's in pain, and then it's like this. It was like this step, and then he does this, and then he does that, and there's this like tension going on in that whole movement, and it was like going like, how does somebody do that? How can somebody continue davening like this if it's so painful? Because if you're krektzing, that means you're in pain of some sort, but yet he's going on about it. So that was just amazing that he did that. Let me just see if there's something else here. Okay.
And were you the eldest of the children?
I'm the Bechor. So it was myself. Let's see, I was born in 48, so I'm 76 now. 76. And my sister was born in 53, and then I have another one that was born in what did I say? 53 and 51, going backwards. Yeah, and so this is my youngest sister. So she's now, how old is she now? She's probably about 70, 71.
How many years younger than you was she?
Yeah, and this is my mom. I don't know if you can see that or not.
And
no.
And that's you with.
And this is my nephew,
Your nephew.
Jeff. Oh, thanks for showing me this. This is my nephew Jeff, who's a lawyer and has Baruch Hashem 3 kids of his own. He lives in Staten Island, and another niece. This is my high school yearbook.
Which high school did you go to?
This was a very famous yeshiva in Cleveland, Telze Yeshiva. I went to Telze Yeshiva, believe it or not, and I had this chus. I had the honor of having Rebbe Lezer Sorotskin as the at the wedding. So Rebbe Lezer, in case you don't know, he was one of the founders of Telstone, and he was my favorite Rebbe because he just made you feel like I don't know how to put it. He was just very warm. He wasn't the most attractive looking, let's put it that way. But he was incredibly warm and kind, and looked out for his talmidim.
When did you go to Telz?
I was there from, let's see, when was I there? I was there from 64 to 68. So I was there from. Let me just get a little water. But I'm shocked. Right.
Amen.
Yeah. So I was there from 64. I got there, let's see, when I was in the 10th grade, and then I graduated in 66, and so 68 till 72. Yeah.
And you remember the Rabbanim?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember the Rabbanim.
There was Rav Bloch.
Rav Eliel Meir Bloch. Actually, I got there It's Rebellion Mayor. I got there after he was already nifter. Yes, I never had the opportunity to meet him, but it was my favorite yeshiva by far. So after Telz, I went to Nea Shul in Baltimore, and Nea Shul is also known for great rabbanim.
And
so
can I ask, when you were in Telz,
yeah,
there's some very prominent South African rabbanim who came from Telz.
Okay.
Rav Tenzer, Avram Tenzer.
Yes, I remember him.
And
I remember
Goldfein.
I don't remember Rabbi Goldfein. Probably if I saw him, I would recognize him. I would
Rav
remember.
Shushad.
I remembered. I remembered him as. I remember the first time I saw him, I said, "Wow, he's a tzaddik."
So he's living in Telstown.
I heard he's living in Telstown.
And
yeah.
Reb Chaim Volkin.
Yes, Reb Chaim, how did you know Reb Chaim Volkin?
From Beit Vegan.
From Beit Vegan, really? Wow, Reb Chaim, yeah. So Reb Chaim Volkin. So Reb Chaim Volkin's, I think, brother-in-law was Rabbi Yehuda Kelmer, wasn't it? Who died, who was nifter a few years ago.
And your time in Telz, how come your parents sent there? Because were they living in Cleveland? Or?
Yeah. So when my mother remarried, so my my mother was from the old school. So they're not into how do you feel about this new person that I'm marrying? You want to tell me how you're feeling. I want to know how you're feeling. So I don't want you to be upset that I'm marrying somebody that you might not like, or heen in the hair. So basically the way I was introduced to my stepfather was, he comes into the room with my mother, and he says, "This is going to be your new father. Go and give him a kiss." And as I remember saying later, that it was like the coldest kiss I ever gave anybody. Okay, yeah, it was horrible. And so we sort of got off on the wrong foot, let's put it that way, or at least I did. And he was really a good man in retrospect. And so I would do things that, as they say, it's called passive aggressive, where I would get him angry and so on. And my mother basically saw what was going on there. So it was either going to be, either she's going to have to divorce him, or I'm going to have to do something with Aaron. And so, make a long story short, she had a brother in Cleveland, Shmuel Aaron Deitch's son, the Helmutzerav, and he was close with the Rosh Yeshivas there. And then the next thing I hear is, you're going to Telz.
And what happened to your father that he passed away?
So my dad, when he came to America, even though he was a smart guy and he knew all these languages, he was not able to get, I don't know what he did in Europe as far as work. I mean, he was still a relatively young man when the war broke out, so I don't know that he was really even able to establish himself in a job. So when he came to America, the best job that he could get, believe it or not, was as a chicken plucker. So he would pluck chickens, and the work was very difficult, and it was not easy. And the hours were just very crazy hours. I would never see him during the week. I would see him on Shabbos, and just the work conditions were such that he developed either pneumonia or something like that, and he wound up getting
or the smoking.
And he also, so the way the family tells it, either he got cancer. I don't know if he got cancer from lung cancer because he was a big smoker, or leukemia. It was one of those. And
because there were no filter on cigarettes.
Yeah, there was no filter on cigarettes
those days.
And I remember the cigarettes that he smoked. It even had an acronym to it. It was called LSMFT, which stood for Lucky Strikes Makes Fine Tobacco. But
and how old were you when your father passed away?
So I was about 11 years old. So from the time I was 9 to about 11, he was sick in and out of the hospitals, and that's what happened there. I want to go back to my mother for a second. One of the things that I remember, just to show you what effect the war has on certain people, in this case my mother. So let me just take a little more water here. So I remember growing up, I would never tell my mother how I was feeling. So even if I had a bad day, I wouldn't say, "Mom, I got to tell you about my day because it's really tough. Would you mind listening, Mom?" And I never did it. I don't know why. I just didn't. And I'll tell you in a minute. You'll understand why I didn't. So one day, I don't remember how old I was. Maybe in my 40s, mid 40s. I don't remember. So I come home one day, or I was visiting, and my mother says, "I see something is bothering you," and she never did that before. Okay. I see something, and I said, no, everything is fine. And something really was bothering me. And she was a good judge of character, so, So I said, no, everything's fine. And she kept at it. And then she would say, and then she would say, no, I went through the war. I went through the war. And if I could deal with what I went with that, you don't think I could deal with whatever is bothering you? And I said, well, that makes a lot of sense. So I told her what was bothering, and she understood what it was and all this, and I felt so much better. And then she came back about an hour later, and she says, "I have to tell you something. Do you know how much you hurt me by what you told me?" Yeah. So from that I learned that I couldn't say anything, or it's not a good idea to say anything about how I feel, because if it hurt her in some way, it was too painful. So I just basically all the time said, "How are you doing?" "I'm fine." "You sure you're fine?" "I'm fine." And that was that. So I realized this is how many people, how hurt, how deeply injured, pain they were, hearing somebody else's suffering. In this case, their child suffering. It was just too unbearable. You were going to say something before, but I
think
forgot.
with your father, possibly he got that job because he didn't have to work on Shabbat.
Yes,
many of the other.
That's a good point. It's a very good point, and also because she worked at a company which is pretty well known, I think, here in Israel too, Meal Mart. Yeah, so he worked at Meal Mart. So you worked it out, and.
So there were many people that couldn't find jobs.
Exactly.
They couldn't work on Shabbat.
Right. So. So that was my father, that was my mother. Yeah.
And your stepfather, where was he born, or do you know that?
So my stepfather was from, I think he was also from Hungary, and he went through the war, and he was I don't know what he was. I don't know, I'm trying to think of a polite way of saying it. He was unable to have children because of things that they did to him.
Was he in the camps?
Yeah, he was in one of the camps, I think. Yeah, and like I said, in retrospect, I think he was a good person, and also I remember hearing at the time that he served in the war in Israel, but I don't remember which war it was, and he was injured at some point, and then he came back here. But because he couldn't have children, they didn't have any more children. He came from a Hasidic family, and I remember he knew how to learn pretty good too. I remember he told me that one of his chavrusas was one of the Vizhnitzer Rebbes, or when they were. There was one called Rav Matala. I don't know them. But so I think he was a good, he knew how to learn.
And how did your siblings, did they get on well with their stepfather?
I don't think they had any particular fond memories. I don't think he knew how to, there was. I called him a gentleman boarder. That was my perception of him. Of our interaction. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I think your mother kept him at a distance from the kids. I think her intention was good, but I think it was a negative thing, like when you were like passive aggressive, with him, she took your side.
Yeah.
She should not have.
Correct. I agree with that.
And I think she wanted to keep him away from the kids.
Yeah.
And it was not positive. So she didn't really let him develop.
Eventually they divorced.
They divorced. Did you attend their wedding?
No, I did not actually, and that was also another.
Were you given an option to go? Or?
I wasn't. I remember seeing him occasionally around the house. I didn't know who he was. I thought, I guess somebody's visiting, a friend or something, and the next thing you know, oh wow,
Not only was there no option, but the mother didn't say that they're going out. It was she presented as a fait accompli.
Right.
After the wedding, she came to him and said, "This is your new father."
Right.
So that led to like a lot of
this is a major trauma for
it's a major trauma, right?
Yeah, it was. So one of the things how being a child, being a second generation, as they say, a second generation Holocaust survivor, and I think most of us who've been through that have something emotionally dysregulated, let's put it that way. Yeah, some trauma. So what I learned while I was growing up, during that 2-year period that my father was very ill, I'm sure it must have been very traumatic for me, and in these days, at least in the States, I guess in here too, somebody says, your kid could use some counseling, or somebody needs to talk to him. He doesn't seem to be himself or herself. And because I was surrounded by Holocaust survivors, nobody's like nobody has a state of mind where counseling is even contemplated. You just were into survival mode. Make sure you have food on the table, a roof over your head, that you can afford the rent, and so on. So basically, how I learned, the way I coped was to basically disconnect myself from feeling, so that not feel emotions. So I was able to learn, proper behavior. Do this, say that. So I knew the cues, the social cues, but I didn't know that. So many years later, I remember going to some therapeutic kind of situation, and the facilitator asked this small group at the time, because we were divided up into groups, to write a letter to either our father or our mother. Okay, that things that you wanted to say that you didn't say. So I decided I wanted to write a letter to my father. So then she said to everyone, "Okay, I want you to read your letter to us. Read the letter back to us, so we all hear it and we can talk about it." So I read my letter very fast. Okay, and she said, "Aaron, that was a very fast reading. Okay, so what I want you to do now, Aaron, is to read it very slowly." Okay. So I read it very slowly, and I started to really cry, okay? And I really started to feel all this, what was going on. And as I'm reading, I'm looking at her, and I'm looking here, and I'm looking. And then it occurred to me something very strange, and I said to myself, I feel like I'm being seen, and I feel like I'm being heard. And I thought, that can't be. My mother always saw me, and she heard me. So I came to the conclusion it was a different type of seeing, and it was a different type of hearing. Where you're here, I felt like somebody was really interested in me rather than being an extension of themselves. Let's put it that way. So yeah. So it took me a while to
How old
learn.
When you had to.
When I was doing that, I was probably in my late 30s, I would say, mid to late 30s. Yeah.
After all those years?
Yeah. It took me a long time.
Did you ever speak to your siblings while you were growing up about what's going on?
Yeah, so with my siblings, No, not really. I remember going out with someone because I wound up working as a psychologist many years later, and one of my colleagues, her first name was Sally, and she was pretty smart cookie. She got her doctorate from NYU and all that, and she had a good sense of humor. So I said, oh, you need to meet. So she said, I'd like to meet your family. Okay. So what do you call it? So she meets my mother and she talks, for some reason, she's talking to them individually. Okay. And then afterwards, she says to me, I felt like I was in therapy with them, or like I'm doing therapy with them. It was, in other words, like it's as if they never had the opportunity to talk to each other within, see what's going on, how we're feeling, but they had to talk to a stranger and say how they're feeling, like as if it just like wasn't safe to say how you're feeling, but it was safe if it was a stranger. Yeah. So we never really talked, with each other about how we're feeling. What I do know was that I'm sure my sisters had, or maybe still have, a strong residue of, what's the word that I'm looking for, of not, for lack of a better word, not being so happy with me, in the sense that whenever my mother would call, when I was single, whenever my mother would call my married sister, she would say, instead of saying, she would call me Ari, my mother, okay? Ari. She would say, instead of saying, well, how are you doing? How's your family? How's your day? She wouldn't say any of that. She would say, where's Ari? He hasn't been calling me. What's going on here?
That's
okay?
when you were single.
Because I was single then, exactly. So, if I'm my sister, I'm like, that's the word I'm looking for, resentment. I feel kind of resentment towards me because, like, what am I, chopped liver? Why is he the center of the universe? Why am I not, being...
Could you have been her favorite?
Yeah, I was the favorite. And my other sister, who was...
your mother called you her little king, right?
Yeah, I think she did call me that. And, yeah, and my other sister, who was, I would say mentally challenged, let's put it that way, my mother would tell her, I don't know, and whatever the context was, like, how do you compare it to Ari? Do you know who Ari is? And who are you? Like that. So it's like, they were put down, and I was just, like that. So,
have you ever discussed this with your sisters now? Or have you? Has the topic ever come up?
It's a good question. Let me see. I think we talked, but not really, kind of surfacey, not really, in other words, like if I would ask, you must have felt some resentment, wouldn't you have? I didn't ask that. That would be a good question to ask, because I would not be surprised if the answer was yes. So, and there was another time related to what we're talking about. I remember having some difficulties with whatever I was having difficulties with, and I was already working as a psychologist on Long Island, and it was recommended to me that I see this particular psychologist, and he said, I think with all that you've been through, you may want to consider going to a psychoanalytic clinic which is low cost, and it's a very good respected one, and if you can go 3 times a week, and it'll be very helpful. Okay, so I called them up. This is in Long Island. I call up the place, and I said, okay, I'd like to be interviewed, and they called me back a week later. They said, well, normally, when you come, there's a whatever the fee is, because you got to pay for it. But in this case, we have a very famous person, well-known person from the UK coming in, and he's written a couple of books, and he's not just an analyst, but he's more of a behaviorist, and he's an interesting combination. And like I said, he's written a couple of books, and he's going to be talking, he's going to be the one interviewing whoever is going to be there. So you can either say no, I'm not interested, because it's going to be with a group of other, like 10 other psychologists who are in training. Or if you want to come, there's no charge, and you'll have the opportunity to be seen by this person. So I thought, okay, it's an interesting opportunity, and if I don't have to pay, great. So I was seen by, so we sit down, and there's a group around, and he says to me, very nice man, elderly man, he says to me, okay, so may I ask why you're here today? What seems to be the problem? He says, well, I need to lose some weight. Lose some weight. There's a chalkboard behind us, and he goes, okay, he needs to lose some weight, okay, because he's doing it. He's also, it's a teaching thing. Okay, so everybody hear this? He's here to lose weight. He says, well, you could go to Weight Watchers. You could lose weight there. So he's not an analyst in the traditional, you don't say anything. He's very engaged. And you can do that. And I say, oh, okay, yeah, I can go to Weight Watchers. And then I said, okay, so why else are you here? And I came up with something else. And I forgot what it was. And he puts that on the board. And that was also not very significant. I must have been able to come up with 5 things. And he's going like, okay, and he's answering everything. And then finally, I probably, so initially I probably didn't trust this person because I wasn't really coming up with what was going on. And then at some point something happened, and I felt, I really trust this man, and you could tell him how you really feel, okay? Because I basically learned don't express your feelings. It's not safe, okay? So I started crying, and he goes, wow, okay, wow. And then he says, okay, he says, oh, I'm going to stop here for a moment, and I want to share what's going on here with everybody. He says, I really thought that this organization, the Psychoanalytic Society of this and all you people, that Aaron was an actor, okay? And the purpose of this thing was to fool me, to see, I don't know why he thought that, but that's what he thought, because he doesn't really come up with, he doesn't have a problem. This is not a person for real problem. In other words, I was able, so I learned to present myself in a way that it looked good to somebody else, but you didn't really know, how I was feeling. But because I trusted him, I was able to. And then he basically said that what my guess is, because you're supposed to come up with some kind of diagnosis and stuff, and he said, my guess is what happened to you is that you suffered a severe depression when your father died and you were never treated for it. So that was amazing. And yeah, so then one thing led to another as far as as far as that goes.
Do you remember his name?
Oh, you know what? I don't remember his name. I could probably, I should look into it. He was very special, and because I was assigned to someone actually who was in training to be an analyst, and this person was already a chief psychologist at some other place. He was an Irish guy, and a real powerful Irish guy, and it wasn't a good shidduch. I went there a couple of times, and I'm sorry, I'm not coming back again. So.
And Aaron, where did you study psychology?
Oh, I went to school at Loyola in Baltimore. Loyola in Baltimore. Yeah. Yeah.
And studying psychology, could you self-analyze yourself as well?
I don't. Well, I guess it depends on the person. My opinion about the whole thing is that if someone has psychological, emotional issues, and they're not, and ideally you'd want your immediate family or extended family to help. And otherwise, lacking that, it's important to have someone who's professional, is experienced, and somebody that you could trust. So that for me, if anybody asked me, who or what, I would say, get a referral, and see and interview them. It's not just they're interviewing you. You're interviewing them to see if it's a good shidduch or not.
And did you ever, in your career, did you ever have patients who were second generation survivors as well?
Oh, that's a good. I worked. I knew people who were, but I didn't. I knew only in the sense that not as my clients or patients. I remember seeing someone in Manhattan. She was actually relatively well known in the field of dealing with Holocaust survivors. I don't know if you've heard of her or not, Dr. Eva Fogelman.
I've heard.
Yeah. So I was seeing her for a while, and she also had a group. So I was a member of that group, and I think I was the only male there. There were all women there, but it was a good learning experience for me to hear other people there. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and my good friend Shmulek, who I was friends with in the DP camp. So yeah, he didn't have it easy either, even though he was successful in many ways. In other ways, he was. In my opinion, he was a bit of an emotional casualty, let's put it that way. Yeah.
And your feeling about second generation survivors, so they carry a lot of baggage as well?
I would say so, yeah. I would say if anybody comes off, in my opinion, anybody comes off as they have their act together, I would say, yeah, it may look like they have their act together, but underneath it all, I think there's a lot of trauma going on, unless they've worked it through with a good therapist or a good counselor. I would say, yeah, I would say it's a problem.
There have been survivors that I've interviewed where they didn't want their children to know anything about the Shoah. They felt they don't want them to be damaged or affected. Right. And it wasn't brought up, and it was a taboo subject. Yeah, and they wanted to give their children, and a lot of the children look back and they say it was a pity because we didn't want to know. Yeah, they didn't want to burden. They didn't want to burden them. Exactly. I mean, in the case of Shmulek, I think his mother, I was getting the impression that even though his father more or less was able to function pretty well after the war, I don't think his mother did that well after that. And that had to have an effect on him, when you see, it must have been very painful for him to deal with that. And can I ask, it's too personal, when you got married, how did your mother react? How did my mother react? I'm trying to remember.
I can tell you. She was very happy, actually.
She was, because
she had heard of my family, and I come from a very good family. So she felt that Aaron was going to be in very good hands.
Yeah.
And she was hoping to be friends with my mom, but she and my mother's personalities are very different.
Yeah, that's true.
So actually at that point, when we got married, I was almost 50. Aaron was...
About 48.
Yeah, around 48. So he had been single all those years.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember my mom once telling me before I met Prince, she said something like, in Yiddish, she would say, you've gone out with so many nice girls, and you could have had there were so many nice girls to choose from, and so on. So she was happy finally.
And you had a good relationship with
his mother?
Yeah.
How would I say it? On the surface, we were fine. she's not the type of person you could be open with, like Aaron was saying. At the table, when she first met me, she said something like, I'm going to give you my diamond ring and you could use my diamond to give me a ring, which to me was not so appropriate at the table, whatever. And then at that time also my mother was not doing well. She was dying from cancer, basically, pancreatic cancer, and she lived next street over, but she didn't want people to know. And so I would visit his mother because she asked to be visited, and then I'd go visit, and sometimes I would visit my mother first and then visit her. And I remember one time coming, even though she was very excited about Aaron marrying me and into our family. One time I came to visit her because I knew she wanted to be visited, and she had just left her house, so she went down a whole lot of steps. And I see her, and she says, honey, but I'm just going out for a walk now. So I said to her, well, if you don't want to go back up, we could always go out for tea somewhere. And she said, thank you so much, that's so kind, but no thank you, basically. And then later on she calls the house. We were married at this point. And she says to Aaron, your wife was so sweet, she came to visit, but she looked so haggard that I didn't want to be seen with her, basically. So I just told her to go home. So I was like feeling very, after visiting my mother, I could see my mother couldn't hold food and whatever, it was very painful. So to me it's like, how do you tell your son that who just got married? It's like whatever was in her head came out of her mouth.
Maybe she was so affected from the war that it's...
Yeah, that could very well be. Let me see, I have a picture.
Of your mom?
No, my mom too, but this is me at our wedding. So she was saying this a few months after, or a few weeks after. I don't know if you could see.
Wow, that's wonderful.
This was my mom here with my youngest brother. So, so we had a relationship, polite relationship.
And with Aaron's sisters?
Pardon?
With Aaron's sisters,
So, I had a better relationship with the younger sister who had mental issues, but was warm. But his older sister suffered, she was telling me that there was a period where she had no food. Her mother would send her without breakfast to school, and without a sandwich for lunch to school. So it was difficult. And Aaron's mother was a widow for many years. She saved her pennies. She had enough money to send Aaron to college or help him, but didn't have money to help the other daughters. So it was difficult.
She was very good to me in the sense, I mean, we get along very well. We don't talk about feelings very much, let's put it that way.
I don't feelings, almost not at all.
Almost not at all. I mean, if she used to work, she retired recently, she used to work at NYU, and she was always working for very top doctors there, and whenever I needed a referral to someone or they needed any medical, she was right there to recommend somebody and help me, and she never said like, don't bother me, or it's like too much, or she was always, ready to step up to the plate whenever I needed. So on the physical level, anything, I remember one time when we were, I guess appearances are also very important.
Well, for his mother and his family, yeah. So did you show this picture? I don't remember which of the two,
Did I show you this one? This was,
This was the,
And have you ever been back to Germany or to Hungary?
I've thought about it, but I haven't really done anything about it. No, not really. No, the answer is no, I haven't. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you had a desire at all?
Yes,
I do
any
have a
desire?
Yeah, I do have a desire. Yeah. Yeah. I would like to see the cemetery that my great grandfather. There's some photos here of the. What did I do?
It's
with
right
it?
here. That?
No, it's not that one. Of what did I do with it?
And these books you
Yeah.
only discovered
This 2 years ago. This one was also about maybe
5 years ago.
maybe 3
And
years
before
ago.
that you never knew? You never knew of
No,
this?
no. Yeah. Also, with my mother, and I mean, you can ask another question too, which you haven't asked, and not that that's not a problem. That's a problem that you didn't ask. The relationship between between my mother and her sisters was also
Half sisters.
half sister, I should say. So, I mean, the one who was married to Alexander Deitch. I mean, it was I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, it was like that. I mean, she would be invited to their weddings, my mother, but I didn't get the sense that they were very particularly close, let's put it that way. And there was also some resentment on my mother's part, and maybe on the other side's part also. I didn't ask on the other side that she felt she did a lot for them as kids because she was the older one. And like it wasn't returned. It wasn't returned.
And they
in different
resented
ways.
her because?
And they resented her for different reasons. I mean, I'll give you one example. When she was little, she went to the local store to buy whatever, and the store owner, I guess this is in Hungary, the store owner said she was a pretty girl, and the store owner says, Raymond's Bista, whose child are you? You're such a lovely, attractive. And she said, I'm the Shaykh's daughter. And he says, the Shaykh's daughter? The Shaykh has a lovely daughter like you? They're all,
And
So-
what their father said,
What,
their
whose
stepfather
father?
said to his daughters that they should be
They
as
should,
industrious
as industrious as
his
Zelda.
as
yeah.
his mother, yeah.
As Zelda. So there was not good feelings.
Those are
you know.
comparisons that
Yeah.
were left
Plus,
them.
they were like stepsisters. But even the one that she was half sisters, it was also not. Because I remember when we came to Israel one time many years ago, my mother and I was still single. We actually did stay in Yesodot, and when we left, my mother said, I wasn't happy seeing her because she said something about you that I didn't like. Probably related that you're still single, and so it just it wasn't like I heard, oh, I'm so happy I came to visit my sister after all these years, and and it was just. And I remember she once described her growing up in that family that she felt like she was like a lamb among wolves. Yeah, so even though it was a Hasidic family, and it was in the meantime it must have been difficult. And she also told me one time that she told her mother when she was a kid, because she was it seemed like she was very outspoken even as a kid. So she said to her mother, where were your brains that you married somebody with 10 kids?
What were you thinking?
And she told me, her mother said, shut your mouth, more or less,
For her to decide that you didn't want to be Hasidic, and for your father also,
Yeah.
that took a lot of courage to do something like that.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
thinkers, they were individuals.
Yeah. They were,
A lot
I
of
guess,
people after the war,
independent.
my parents also were from Hasidic family, but after the war, my mother wanted to be more
Modern.
what they call modern, but I don't like that word. Certainly not Hasidic.
And looking back,
Yeah.
would you, in your opinion, that your family decided to go to America and not to come to Israel,
Yeah.
do you think that was a mistake, or do you think it would have been very different if you would have come here?
Wow. I don't know the answer to that, but I imagine that it would have been certainly for my mom, I don't. I mean, maybe if she had, I mean, the fact that she had a half sister here, maybe would have been easier.
And half brother.
Or half what? And the what?
And brother. My guess is that two things. One, she had more family in the States. And just like my mother and her two sisters came to the States, they wanted to be together. And two, Israel was very, very difficult then.
It was austerity. It was
Financially and otherwise it was just... so a lot of people felt that they went through a lot and they didn't want to have to go through so much. Even though it wasn't easy in the States, there were millions of immigrants at the same time and it was hard to get jobs. My father had 3 jobs when he first came to New York, just to make ends meet.
Make ends meet, yeah.
And my mother took in wash. Just to have make ends meet. And
Yeah, I think it would have been tough for them to be here.
So can I ask what?
Sure.
Because it's amazing being second generation. What advice do you give, or what message do you give to other second generations, even third generation?
Yeah.
Because you witnessed.
To talk. To have. I remember once. This is an answer to your question, a partial answer. So I remember many years ago going to an annual conference of the American Psychological Association. So one of the sections or one of the programs that they had was where three of very well-known, nationally known psychologists were going to talk about whatever the topic was, and then they were going to have questions asked. So one of the psychologists actually was from South Africa. His name was Arnold, was it Lazaroff? Arnold Lazaro? Arnold, very distinguished, beautiful accent, and very smart. And so somebody actually directed the question to him and said, Dr. So-and-so, well, who do you go to if you have a problem? It was a very good question. Who do you go to if you have a problem? And this was a crowd that was like not afraid to ask questions, or they weren't spoiled from, So he said that if I have a problem, something that bothers me, I call my friends. He didn't say, well, I go to my therapist. I go to my friends. I have good friends, and we talk to each other, and we share things. So
and some of them are probably either psychologists or very self-aware, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, that was a good answer. So I would say to have, I think I remember reading somewhere also that, at least for men, I don't know about women, that many, if not most, men don't have friends outside of their spouses. And to some extent, that's true for me. That I think for a lot of other people to have people that you can, I mean, one of the great things, one of the things that I treasure when I think about Tells It, I had a lot of friends there. It was amazing. People from all over the world that you'd be meeting, and just different types of people. I mean,
what guys call friends, which isn't necessarily what girls call friends. What girls call friends,
okay.
Yeah.
And to have someone that, what does it say? Perkova says, you need to talk to somebody about it. And,
Chandra, what advice would you give? Being married to a second generation as well, and
I think I gave advice on my interview. What advice would I give to second generation at this point? It's a good question. So at this point, most of us are already
up there in years,
in our upper 70s.
Maybe the third generation.
For third.
Yeah, the question what I give to
I think it's affecting even third generations.
Yeah, I think so.
But I guess that it's very important to have relationships and people that you care about. you know, if you have like one or two really close friends that you trust and you could be open with, and not somebody who necessarily agrees with you, but cares about you enough that if they don't think what you're thinking or doing is right, they will share that.
I'll be honest.
Yes, they'll be honest with you. And given the situation now, which is the war in Israel, post-October 7, and it's going on over 300 days, I think.
Yeah.
300 and something.
302.
2 days.
302.
Yeah. I would say just also be aware that, you know, the thing of B'chol Dor V'Dor, in every generation, Jews are persecuted, not appreciated, and it seems like there's a lot of, from the top down, there's a lot of very conscious, planned attacks against Jews, and that we should keep together, try to not be polarized, not be so, you know, cliquish, or be with a group of people that are like you, but try to be warm and caring to all Jews. I think that's a very important point today.
I think there's a slogan, united we will win.
Yeah.
Pardon?
United we will win.
Biachad Nenatzach.
Yes.
You know, from time to time, I also want to add what the Prince was saying, that like a couple of days ago, we went around the neighborhood, and there was some sort of a protest, as there frequently is around here. And when I talked to them to hear what their point of view is, in the past, I would have to really restrain myself from arguing with them and you know, becoming a fight, so to speak, or yelling.
Especially those doing protests.
Yeah,
against,
who are very on the left. And what I decided at some point, I said, look, they're Jewish, they have a point of view. Listen to their point of view. You don't have to agree with it, but don't argue. You know, don't hate, don't argue. And it's nice when so the other day we were talking to somebody, we didn't agree with him, but we just listening.
You can agree to disagree.
You agree to disagree, exactly. So it's important to have, like you're saying, achdus and biyachad.
So I want to add to that I think people should take steps and go out of their way to befriend Jews who are not like them, not thinking the same way, not the same type of party. And if you're religious, people more secular or atheistic. And the same thing for people who are secular. They should go out of their way and befriend somebody who's Shomer Shabbat, and include them in some way. You don't have to go to them for dinner or whatever, but include them in your heart and your warmth, and feel connected and feel this is a real Jew. Because in a lot of circles, it's like, in many very firm Haredi circles, when I grew up, like I've got a Hasidic family, some of them are very warm and welcoming, and some of them felt like we were a shvatzim. And in fact, the cousin who introduced my parents, who actually related but didn't know each other, thought I'm introducing my father, who's a shegitz from a good family, my mother, who's from a good family,
so
and I'm putting them together.
How would you translate shegitz into?
It's sort of like Gentile, very pejorative. It's not quite a pagan, but it's like
not appropriate.
It's not appropriate. It's certainly not a Jew. And I feel like, you know, I went to a movie recently. What was the name of that movie? Do you remember?
Which one?
About Sephardim when they first came here and were in development towns, and how they were treated and not responded to. And there's
I remember the name of it.
And we were speaking to somebody afterwards. It turned out to be a reporter from Haaretz, and obviously very left. And as soon didn't have my head covered, but I was wearing a skirt. And when she noticed I was wearing a skirt, she said, "You're not religious, like you're not like one of them, kind of thing, are you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she just like walked away, basically. And her husband came, you know, basically they offered us a piece of watermelon, but no conversation. That was like, yes, watermelon, but end of conversation. So you see a lot from both sides, and I think we need to really go out of our own comfort zone and connect, and that's what I would say.
Message. I just want to thank you both.
Sure, very welcome. Thank you.
It's such a beautiful message, and it's so appropriate, especially for these times.
Yeah.
So really, I just want to thank you both so
Sure.
much.
Very
I
welcome.
want to
really
thank
has been-
you. That's really wonderful.
You know, I must tell you, it's just been so not only inspiring, but it's just unbelievable.
Mhm.
And to see you
Yeah.
smiling, because you really did go through
Yeah.
quite a trauma,
Yeah.
quite
Yes.
a, which people think about the parents, but not really the children, and how it's
Right.
going to affect the second generation.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, he had a mother that was really, I mean, I don't want to say too much, but she once said, children are, how'd she put it in? Children belong.
Oh yeah, she said something very strange when I first heard it. She said, she said that children belong to
Are the property
are the
of
property of their parents.
parents.
Or belong, yeah, that the
And-
parents can do whatever they want with the children.
And she had no,
Yeah.
like he said,
No
he
clue.
could never talk about feelings to his
Yeah.
parents. With my mother, it was hard too also. Like if I had stuff going on in school and I was made fun of or something for one reason or another, there wasn't, I didn't feel comfortable to talk about it. But my mother was much more open than his mother. You know, comparatively, there was like,
Yeah.
and my father was around, and I had a father that was very loving, and a father that knew that kids have to learn for themselves.
It's amazing that you went into psychology.
Yeah.
That's
I
actually-
wanted to say also there was, I remember.
But I want to thank you
Yeah,
both.
sure,
and,
sure. Yeah. So I remember when I lost my mom. So I was crying, and a friend of ours, Phyllis.
Yeah.
Phyllis. So she said something amazing that I would never have thought of. And our friend was an amazing, very brilliant person.
Brilliant
And she said that
knowledgeable.
the reason you're crying is not because you lost your mother. The reason you're crying is because you did not have a mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would not have made any connection like that.
And he
But she
didn't get
was-
it then, but
But
yeah.
she was a brilliant, you know.
But that's
Yeah.
a heavy thing to say.
Yeah,
It's-
yeah.
Yeah, she came from two parents who were very abusive.
I never would have heard that from even a good psychologist. Never would have heard that,
Yeah.
you know.
But maybe she
Yeah.
tried to do the best that she could.
Yeah.
under the
Of
circumstances.
course, she tried the best. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I cannot thank you enough.
Okay.
It's
Very
been
well.
such
Thank
an
you
honor
so
and a
much.
privilege. It really has.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
for sharing. So
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
been the numbers.
amazing.
Really,
Yeah.
it's been unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
At some point
thank
down the line, I still would love to add stuff, but not tonight.